Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. We're entering week 4 of the Russian invasion. Kiev is being bombed, civilians are dying, Ukraine is ready for compromise, it says, but Russia's terms are tough. It is fighting a sanctions war with the West. From President Biden to his son, to his press secretary, Moscow has sanctioned everyone. The Ukrainian president addressed the US Congress today. He asked for more weapons. He showed some dramatic images. He's been addressing many Western parliaments of late. He gets a lot of applause, standing ovations, but no troops, no NATO membership, no EU membership. If verbal support could win you wars, Ukraine would have won by now. But 3 weeks into this fighting, the human cost continues to mount. The world has begun to feel the heat. Prices of wheat, oil and sugar are soaring. Countries are reassessing their partnerships. Riyadh is reaching out to Beijing. The US is hoping Iran would dump Russia and do business with them. India reportedly hosting the Chinese foreign minister. It's a world in flux. On Gravitas tonight, we try to make sense of the moves on this global chessboard. Day 21 of the Ukraine invasion. This was Kiev this morning. Look at these pictures. Another residential complex was bombed. Ukraine's capital is now a clear target of Russian forces. At least 4 multi-story buildings have been destroyed. Scores of people have died. Across Ukraine, Russia is intensifying aerial attacks. The focus is no more on just taking cities. The Russians seem to be prepared to destroy cities if needed. Why the sudden escalation? Perhaps to build pressure in talks. Ukraine's president says there is room for compromise. Is Moscow trying to squeeze more concessions from Kiev by bombing Ukraine? What will be the terms of this truce? And will Ukraine agree to Russia's demands? On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss all of this and more. First to the battleground, where fighting continues in major cities. Russia has changed tactics. They're picking Ukrainian targets and firing missiles at them. Ukraine says civilians are being struck and that 2/3 of Russian rockets have hit civilian establishments. Of course, Russia denies all of these charges. Their president, Vladimir Putin, has justified the actions of his forces. This is what he said.
In terms of the military tactics developed by the Russian Ministry of Defense and the General Staff, they have been completely justified. And our lads, soldiers and officers have shown bravery and heroism. And they are doing everything that they can to avoid loss of civilian life in Ukrainian cities.
Putin also said Russian forces do not want to occupy Ukraine. Kiev, understandably, does not trust Moscow. It is trying to project strength. Last night, their parliament held an emergency session. The Ukrainian Parliament. This was in Kiev. More than 350 lawmakers were present. Together they sang the national anthem. Ukraine has extended martial law by 30 days. The government has approved more military spending. They're going to need more help to turn the tide. Their president, the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, continues to try to rally for global support. Today, he addressed the US Congress and made a simple demand from American lawmakers. Give us more weapons, he said. Listen to this.
Russian troops have already fired nearly 1,000 missiles at Ukraine. Is this a lot to ask for? to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people, is this too much to ask? Aircraft that can help Ukraine, help Europe. And you know that they exist and you have them, but they are on Earth, not in the Ukrainian skies. They do not defend our people.
Strong words by Zelensky there. He needs all the support he can get. Talks with Russia are at a critical stage. Ukraine says there is room for compromise. Russia says they're close to a compromise deal. That's the word, that's the term they used, compromise deal. So what's holding them back? Look at Russia's demands. Number one, Russia wants a neutral Ukraine. What does that mean? Neutral means no NATO membership. And Ukraine seems willing to concede on that front. Zelensky has said as much, that Ukraine can roll back its bid to join NATO. Not like NATO is taking Ukraine in a hurry. They've kept Ukraine waiting for 14 years, and after this war, it's damaged goods. All sides get that. So concession on the NATO membership bid is very much up for discussion. Demand number two, the status of Crimea, also Donetsk and Luhansk, the two territories controlled by Russian separatists. Vladimir Putin declared them independent republics last month, just before the war began. He annexed Crimea in 2014. Now he wants all of this to be accepted, for Crimea to be recognized as part of Russia and for Donetsk and Luhansk to be accepted as independent territories. These are the Russian demands. How far is Ukraine prepared to relent? What does Ukraine want from these talks? First of all, security guarantees. Stop the attacks. Russia seems ready to discuss this.
A neutral status is being seriously discussed in connection, of course, with security guarantees. This is exactly what President Putin said in February at one of his press conferences. Any possible options, any generally acceptable security guarantees for Ukraine and all countries, including Russia, with the exception of NATO expansion. Now it is exactly this. You quoted Zelensky, what is being discussed at the negotiations now. There are concrete formulations that, in my view, are close to being agreed.
The defense ministers of NATO met today. They said they welcome the progress in Russia-Ukraine talks, but reports also say that NATO military commanders are working on a new project. They're drawing up military plans with Russia in mind. They're expected to ramp up deployments in Eastern Europe, send more troops and missile defense systems to the region, not to Ukraine, to Eastern Europe. Next week, NATO leaders will gather in Brussels for a summit. That's where these plans could be discussed. Meanwhile, the sanctions war is intensifying. Russia versus the West. After the West sanctioned Russia, Russia has sanctioned top American leaders. It's an interesting list. It includes US President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, other key members of Team Biden like the National Security Advisor, the CIA Chief, even the White House Press Secretary, plus Biden's son, Hunter Biden. He too has been sanctioned. Interestingly, the list also features Hillary Clinton. The fighting in Ukraine may end, but the war between Russia and America looks set to continue, and it's dividing the world. Camp politics is intensifying. NATO is huddling. Russia is betting on China. All of this makes India's position very difficult. How much longer can neutrality work? Think back to February 24th, when Russia invaded. India had two priorities. A, evacuate Indian citizens stuck in Ukraine, and B, navigate the great power rivalry. The first priority has been completed. Indian nationals are back home safe. But the second task is trickier. On one side, you have Russia, a long-standing strategic partner. On the other side is America, India's best bet to counter China. So New Delhi decided to remain neutral, to pursue dual tracks. Now, here's the problem with neutrality. If it fails, you end up with no support, neither from Russia nor from America. That is the real worry for India. Take Russian oil, for instance. America has stopped buying Russian oil. Europe is reducing dependence, or so it says. So Russia is hoping that India will step up. Russia has offered discounted oil to India, and reports say India has taken that offer. The Indian Oil Corporation has purchased 3 million barrels of Russian oil. Technically, there's nothing illegal about it. Russian oil is not a sanctioned commodity. Plus, India needs the cheaper energy. The only worry was the American response. How would Washington respond? Would Washington object to New Delhi's purchase? Here's how the White House responded.
Well, our message to any country continues to be that obviously abide by the sanctions, but that we have put in place and recommended. I don't believe this would be violating that, but also think about where you want to stand when the history books are written in this moment in time.
That's classic American response. History will judge you, they say. Has history judged America yet for Iraq or for Libya? The fact is every country is pursuing its national interest. India needs cheaper oil. Russia offered cheaper oil, so naturally the deal happened. And India is not alone. Europe is buying Russian oil. It is trading with Russia. More than 40% of their natural gas comes from Russia. These imports are worth millions of dollars. On the 2nd of March, well after the invasion, Europe paid $755 million to Russia. That's a single day's payment, $755 million. Is Europe also on the wrong side of history then? And if yes, why is Biden heading to Brussels next week? Why is he conferring with European states? Buying Russian oil is not the problem for India. The problem is the politics. India's neutrality was supposed to be the best of both worlds. America brings deterrence against China. Russia brings leverage. You get the best. Basically a win-win for India. But are things playing out as planned? America is still betting on China's help. They want China to isolate Russia. It fits with Joe Biden's campaign commitments. He wants competition with China, not conflict. So Biden is investing political capital into negotiating with China, and that is not good news for India. What's worse, Biden's Pacific pivot has lost momentum. Suddenly all the focus is on Europe. New weapons for NATO, new deployments for NATO. The Indo-Pacific has taken a backseat. And for India, this could be a problem. If America gets bogged down in Europe, it is advantage China. There will be no hope of American deterrence, which brings us to India's second hope, Russia. Russia's leverage. Can Vladimir Putin temper Xi Jinping's belligerence? Well, that depends on how strong Russia's position is. Let's consider two scenarios. Number one, China is 100% committed to helping Putin. Xi Jinping props up the Russian economy. He helps Russia evade sanctions. In that case, Putin will be indebted to Xi Jinping. What kind of leverage can he bring then? Will those Russian weapons continue to pour into India? That's if China backs Russia completely. Scenario number two, China's support to Russia remains lukewarm, like it is right now. Politically, they support Putin, but financially, they dump him. If that happens, America is going to be happy. Russia's economy will bleed, and that's good news for Biden. Not so much for India, though. If China cools off on Russia, they will need something in return, a bargain in the Indo-Pacific, perhaps. Where does that leave India, then? Not in a desirable position. Just think about it. America is dumping allies all over the place. Last year, they dumped Afghanistan. No consultations with India. No concern for regional security. They just packed up and fled. Russia did no better in Ukraine. They were planning to invade all along. They knew 20,000 Indians were living in Ukraine, yet there was no intimation from Russia, none that we know of. Even during evacuation, Ukraine did most of the heavy lifting. Russia was busy peddling fake news. So India must ask itself this question: have we bet on the wrong powers? America is still hoping for China's tacit help. Quad has too many agendas, but no endgame. They won't even name China for that matter. As for Russia, they're finished without China's help. How does India navigate this dilemma? One option is to go it alone. Reports say China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit India later this month. Remember, the standoff in Ladakh has not been diffused. More than 50,000 Chinese soldiers are camping near the line of actual control, and that is India's most pressing priority. If talks prevail in Ukraine, it would boost India's position. But what if the war drags on? Then bloc politics will intensify. Either way, the war in Ukraine will force a rethink in India. Who do we count on? Who will walk the talk? Simply put, it's a strategic reality check for New Delhi. Well, what we know for sure is that the world cannot count on China. Our next story is proof. 2 days ago, Ukraine's border guards busted a Chinese trafficking operation. Chinese citizens trying to cross the border, smuggling 2 babies out of Ukraine. Thankfully, they were caught, busted. But many more children remain vulnerable in Ukraine and could fall prey to Chinese traffickers. Our next report tells you more.
Chinese traffickers have reached Ukraine. and they are trying to smuggle babies out of the country. Ukraine's border police recently foiled one such attempt. These Chinese men were trying to smuggle 2 infants out of Ukraine. Their plan was to cross the Porubne border crossing point and escape to Romania. But the border guards of Ukraine stopped the Chinese traffickers. They were asked for the identifying documents of the babies. They didn't have any. Traffickers were busted. The babies are now being looked after by Ukraine's border guards. They may be the luckier ones. The war has separated many newborns from their parents. In Kyiv alone, 21 newborns are being kept in basements. They were born to surrogates.
Worried for ourselves, for our children, for these little babies who stay here, for everyone. It is terrifying because we sit here and we don't know what will happen the next minute. Even though we stay in a basement, when there is an explosion somewhere nearby, we can hear it very clearly. There was some tonight. It is terrifying indeed.
Around 200,000 children live in orphanages and foster homes. Reports say they're at the risk of being exploited. And the biggest threat comes from China. It is one of the biggest trafficking hubs in the world. Going by some estimates, 200,000 children were abducted by Chinese traffickers every year from 1980 to 2016. 20,000 trafficking cases were reported in 2012. And in 2019, 4,500 cases were recorded. And these are the official Chinese estimates. The actual scale of the problem is said to be much bigger. Despite China's attempts to hide it, the truth is coming out. These images went viral recently. They show a chained Chinese woman from Jiangsu. She was trafficked multiple times. She had 8 children. China tried its best to bury the story. Initially, Beijing labelled the victim as mentally ill, but a public backlash followed. And the government was forced to launch an investigation. Now China's traffickers have turned their focus on Ukraine. Children caught in a war are easy prey, and unfortunately, they're nobody's priority right now.
Wars can be terrible for supply chains. There can be disruptions, shortages, all kinds of challenges. The biggest example is oil. We've been seeing that. At the first sign of war, oil prices begin to rise. But in Ukraine, it is not just oil. Many more commodities are at stake, especially these 3: wheat, sugar, and cooking oil. Let's start with the numbers. Russia is the largest exporter of wheat. They make up 18% of global exports. Ukraine is the 5th largest, making up 7% of global sales. Put together, that's 25%. What happens if this supply chain is disrupted? Shortages and inflation, that's what happens. Ukraine has already banned the export of food grains. Frankly, there's no other option. Ukraine's exports go through the Black Sea, specifically via 3 ports: Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv. All 3 ports are on Russia's radar. Moscow, too, has announced a partial ban. They have temporarily stopped exports to ex-Soviet states. Imagine 25% of the global supply disappearing overnight. Naturally, there will be consequences. Which countries will be the worst hit? Let me show you this list. Egypt is the biggest wheat importer in the world. Turkey is 2nd. Bangladesh is 3rd. Next comes Nigeria, Yemen, Azerbaijan, and the Sudan. Also on this list are Libya, Lebanon, and Tunisia. Do you see the trend? Wheat is not imported by affluent powers. It is bought by the developing world. And if there is a supply gap, these countries will suffer. The United Nations is making grim predictions. It says food prices could surge by up to 22%. You could say it's the perfect storm. First climate change, then the Wuhan virus, and now war. Look at the numbers since 2020. Wheat prices are up 33%. Sunflower oil prices up 60%. If the war drags on, things could get worse. Is there any way to contain this rise? Well, other producers could step up. Countries like the US, Canada, and France. But protectionism is a problem. You see, prices are rising everywhere, not just in Ukraine or Russia. So every country is guarding its food reserves, basically saving up for the future. The second vulnerable commodity is cooking oil. Again, let's begin with the numbers. Russia and Ukraine lead sunflower oil production. Together, they make up 75% of the exports. 75%. It's almost like a monopoly. The good news is there is no export ban. Russia and Ukraine still export sunflower oil. The bad news is productivity is down, and you can imagine why. More than 3 million people have fled Ukraine. Their cities are being pounded by missiles. Obviously, agriculture is not their top priority at the moment. For India, this could be a huge blow. 90% of India's sunflower oil comes from Russia and Ukraine. Since the invasion, that supply has fallen. The result is this. Sunflower oil prices have surged 32 rupees per litre in India. Will this be a long-term problem? The government of India says no. It won't be a problem. Sunflower oil makes up just 10% of India's edible oil consumption. The rest is palm oil and soybean oil. So in the long run, India has two options. Diversify purchases, that is, start buying sunflower oil from elsewhere, or shift to other edible oils. And like I said, this is a long-term solution. Diversification does not happen overnight. Neither will consumers change their cooking preferences. And remember, edible oils have a chain effect. Restaurants use it. Bakers use it. Instant food companies use it. So the effect will be felt down the supply chain. The third vulnerable commodity is sugar. Compared to last year, sugar prices are up 20% already. Now, Ukraine and Russia are not leading producers, but the war is fueling uncertainty. And that uncertainty is increasing prices. By the way, these commodities are not luxuries. They're staple goods. Wheat, oil, sugar. Staple. They're part of every humanitarian aid shipment too. They top every family's grocery list. The developed world will not mind these shortages. They're imposing export curbs. They're protecting their reserves. But what about countries like Yemen and Libya? They depend on aid shipments. Without imports, they will plunge into starvation. That is the reality of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The people of Yemen have nothing to do with Ukraine. Neither do the people of Libya or the Sudan or Nigeria. But their daily meals will become more expensive thanks to Vladimir Putin. That is, if there is a meal at all. Let me tell you what else is at stake. The Iran nuclear deal. The war in Ukraine has cast a shadow on it. Talks to revive the deal have been paused. The reason is Russia. I'll explain. Russia is one of the signatories of the Iran nuclear deal. And now it is said to be holding the agreement hostage. What does Russia want? An exemption from sanctions. Russia wants to keep dealing with Iran, and for that it wants the West to give written guarantees, open a door for future transactions between Russia and Iran.
We substantively discussed the situation around the comprehensive plan on the Iran nuclear deal. We appeal for prompt revival of this agreement, which was endorsed by the United Nations resolution and based on initially projected balance of interests. We are waiting for the US to return to the legal field in this agreement, and we wait for the lifting of the illegal sanctions, which were implemented by the US to strike not only Iran and the Iranian people, but many other people.
That was Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He met with his Iranian counterpart in Moscow yesterday. Russia wants to use the Iran deal as leverage, extract concessions in lieu of support. Now, all of this is holding up talks. Some reports say the deal may be scuttled. And that's more bad news for Joe Biden. The West has been negotiating for 11 months. They say they're close to an agreement. In fact, Europe's foreign affairs chief has hinted that a new deal is ready. It is just waiting to be signed. This is what he said. A pause in Vienna talks is needed due to external factors. A final text is essentially ready and on the table. I'm sure you know what these external factors are. That's a reference to Russia and its demands. And it's a catch-22 for the West. Easing sanctions on Russia is not an option. Letting go of the Iran deal is not an option either. So they're trying to come up with an alternative deal, one that could shut Russia from the process altogether.
We continue to believe that a mutual return to full implementation of the JCPOA is the best way to address that. But if external factors make JCPOA re-implementation impossible, we will, of course, be open to diplomatic alternatives.
We will be open to diplomatic alternatives, he says, which basically means get Russia out and lock the deal. What would that look like? Under the existing deal, Russia has two important responsibilities. A, take control of Iran's excess enriched uranium, and B, help Tehran convert the Fordo nuclear plant into a research facility. If Russia is pushed out of the deal, someone else will have to do these things. China, Britain and France are said to be the likely candidates. Reports say European diplomats are on the job. They're trying to find a way around Russian demands. But here is the biggest question. Would Iran agree to this? Does Iran want Russia out of the agreement? There is no indication that it does. In fact, Iran is blaming the United States for this delay.
We are not at a point to announce an agreement. And that is because some very key but limited matters remain which require decisions to be taken in Washington. As soon as these decisions are taken in Washington, we will have reached a point to return to Vienna and start the final round of talks to achieve a good and lasting agreement.
Russia has welcomed Iran's statement, and the statement has put America in a tough position. It doesn't want another conflict to flare up in West Asia, and for that, the deal with Tehran is necessary. The Biden administration is under a lot of pressure, both at home and abroad. On Sunday, missiles landed close to an American consulate in Iraq. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But American officials are blaming Iran for the attack. Republicans have sensed an opportunity here. 49 out of 50 Republican senators, 49 out of 50, have spoken out. And they've refused to back the new deal with Iran. The clock is ticking for Joe Biden. His choices are tough. The last thing he wants is another foreign policy defeat. And if his track record is anything to go by, that's what he will have, another defeat. Meanwhile, the nuclear threat from Iran is real, as is the risk of a nuclear disaster from Ukraine. Earlier this month, the country's largest nuclear plant caught fire, and this week a power outage was reported at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Both these incidents have led to fears of a possible nuclear tragedy or radioactive elements getting leaked into the atmosphere. And this fear is pushing many to take preemptive steps, especially in the US and Europe. People are buying potassium iodine pills. This is to keep their immune system safe from a nuclear radiation. What are these pills? How effective are they against radiation? And should we be taking them already? Here's a report.
The intensifying war in Ukraine has led to a surge in the demand of something unusual. Potassium iodide. What's that? The Center for Disease Control describes it as a salt of stable iodine that can help block radioactive iodine from being absorbed by the thyroid gland, thus protecting this gland from radiation injury. In simpler terms, potassium iodide combats nuclear radiation. It can guard the body's immune system in the event of a nuclear war, the chances of which are increasingly growing. On the 4th of March, fighting between Russian and Ukrainian forces led to a fire at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the largest nuclear plant in all of Europe. Fortunately, the fire was extinguished before it could reach the plant's reactors. It's been barely 10 days, and there's another threat, this time at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Reports claim that a high-voltage power line at this plant had been damaged by Russian forces. The power was soon restored, but the fears of a nuclear tragedy are only growing.
If the missile rocket gets there, the shelter object could be destroyed. And then the radiation would spread all over Europe. If any of the reactors at Energodar Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is damaged, it will be Fukushima.
Back in Europe, these developments have triggered panic. There's a growing fear that radioactive iodine could soon get released in the atmosphere. This has led to panic buying of potassium iodide pills. People are lining up at medical stores to stock up. A 100-fold increase in demand has been reported in Finland. In Belgium, at least 30,000 residents have got these pills. There's panic buying in America too. Inventories are running out of stocks. Prices are rising by the day, while the fear seems to be justified. The big question is, how safe are potassium iodide tablets? The CDC says these tablets work, but only for 24 hours. Meaning they can block the intake of radioactive iodine for just 1 day. Furthermore, it says that these tablets should not be taken unless there is actually a risk of a nuclear exposure. Which means that ingesting the medicine preventatively and without supervision could end up doing more harm than good.
Every war has a villain, someone who defines the politics, the battle and the drama. In this war, that's Vladimir Putin, and frankly he fits the bill. Former spy, unlikely rise to power and a mysterious personal life. Many questions swirl around him. Tonight we focus on one of them. How rich is Vladimir Putin? Here's what the official records say. Putin's annual salary is $140,000. His assets include 1 apartment, 1 trailer and 3 cars. Modest, simple and frugal. Well, not so fast. Unofficially, Putin could be a billionaire. According to one report, he could be the richest person on earth. His net worth almost $200 billion. Take a look at his assets. A mansion on the Black Sea worth $1 billion. It's got a casino, a nightclub, the whole shebang. The sofas are worth $500,000. The bar table is said to be worth $54,000. Even the washrooms are minted. It's got toilet brushes worth $850 and paper rolls worth $1,200. Imagine maintaining a property of this scale. You don't have to, because we've got the numbers. $2 million and 40 employees. That's what it takes to maintain this mansion. So that's where Putin allegedly holidays. But how does he get there? He can choose from his exhaustive list, 58 aircraft, 700 cars, or perhaps the $100 million super yacht. Vladimir Putin is spoiled for choice. He's also got an impressive watch collection. Take a look at this picture. Putin is wearing a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar wristwatch, price tag $60,000. If you think that's expensive, sample this. A German luxury watch, price a humble $500,000. There are no pictures of Putin sporting it, but multiple reports say he is the proud owner. Put together, the Russian president could be worth $200 billion. Where did that number come from? It was estimated by a financier called Bill Browder. He runs Hermitage Capital Management. At one point, it was the largest foreign portfolio investor in Russia. But Browder got nosy. He took on big Russian companies like Gazprom. The result was this: he was banned from entering Russia. Coming back to Putin, how exactly did he make this money? Bill Browder says it all started in the year 2003. Back then, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was Russia's richest man, but he made one fatal mistake. He challenged Vladimir Putin. What followed was a witch hunt. Khodorkovsky was jailed. His companies were seized. So the spooked oligarchs reached out to Putin and they had one question: how do we stay on your good books? According to Browder, Putin demanded 50% on profits, on assets, on everything. I know the story sounds very dramatic, but remember, these are only reports. The real picture could be quite different. Here's what we can say though. Dubious deals have followed Vladimir Putin everywhere he's gone. When he was in St. Petersburg, when he shifted to the Kremlin, corruption and cronyism was a Putin speciality. But is it worth $200 billion? Well, that's hard to say. Whatever assets Putin has, the West is intent on capturing them. The UK, for instance, has created a kleptocracy unit. The job is simple: hunt for Putin's hidden assets. The UK believes Putin has stashed millions of dollars in London. Their mission is to identify and freeze all of it. But experts say it's not going to be easy. The Kremlin has mastered shady dealings. Their proxies are hard to track. Their bank accounts are sealed away. And their cybersecurity is top-notch. So freezing Putin's assets is not going to be easy. The bigger question is, will this work? Putin is surrounded by loyal ministers. Most of them are oligarchs, and they a lot of these oligarchs still support him. So personal finances are not exactly his concern. A bigger worry is the Russian economy. Until now, Putin and his cronies did not worry about that. The oil money kept flowing in. So Russia's economy took care of itself, basically. When that stops, when the oil money stops, the Russian people will feel the pinch. Their savings could disappear. Their assets could be worth less. And if that happens, when that happens, there will be public discontent. So personal sanctions on Putin are mostly symbolic. The painful ones do not target leaders. They indirectly target the people. We'll be tracking this, of course. The sanctions have also had an unintended effect, a churn among the middle powers. Do they stick with America, or do they keep their options open, explore new ones? Saudi Arabia, for instance, is circumspect. They are snubbing America, reaching out to Russia, and now courting China. Reports say Riyadh has invited Xi Jinping for a state visit. If true, this could change the politics of West Asia. For starters, Xi Jinping has not left China in 2 years. So this will be quite a visit. He's been shut away from the public. If he picks Riyadh to end that streak, it would be symbolic. Secondly, the timing of this invite. Saudi Arabia and the US are not on good terms. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is not answering Joe Biden's calls. He's refused to increase oil production as America demanded or requested. So this visit, Xi Jinping's visit to Riyadh, would be a clear message to Washington, D.C. Saudi Arabia has other options, and it's not afraid to explore them. Now, what do we know about this trip? It could happen after the holy month of Ramadan, so possibly in the month of May. Parallels are being drawn to 2017. That's when Donald Trump visited Riyadh for his first foreign trip. He was given a grand welcome by the Saudis. Something similar awaits Xi Jinping, perhaps. But 2017 was all about rebuilding an old relationship. This one is about building a new one. How will it change West Asian politics? And what's in it for both sides? Let's discuss the power equations first. Since the last century, America has been the biggest military power in West Asia. They intervened in Kuwait. They invaded Iraq. They contained the Iranian threat. They armed Israel. So America's position in West Asia was unchallenged. But Xi Jinping has been slowly chipping away. His first target was Iran. Iran needed relief from sanctions. China needed oil. So both sides signed a 25-year economic agreement. At the same time, Beijing reached out to Iran's rivals, to Israel, to the UAE, to Saudi Arabia. They funded economic projects in West Asia. They offered to sell weapons. And most importantly, they offered something America could not, a market for their oil. You see, the US is energy independent now. They have their own oil. They don't need West Asian oil anymore. In fact, America is the biggest oil producer in the world. On the other hand, China does need oil. It is the biggest energy consumer in the world. So put yourself in Saudi Arabia's shoes. Do you need a customer or a reluctant friend who lectures you? Plus, China brings leverage over Iran, something that America can never offer. This rethink by Saudi Arabia is another setback for Joe Biden. He can only blame himself for this. Biden ended US support for the war in Yemen. He declassified files linking Saudi officials to the Khashoggi murder, and now Riyadh has reacted. And how? But what's in it for China? A lot. Number one, a foothold in West Asia. West Asia is key to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Without Saudi help, Xi Jinping's vision is not possible. Number two, benefit number two for China, insurance for the genocide on Uyghurs. Saudi Arabia is the de facto leader of the Muslim world, the custodian of Islam's holiest sites. If Saudi Arabia is hosting Xi Jinping, it would be a clean chit. Having said that, diplomacy is all about cloak and dagger. So Riyadh's real intentions have to be studied. Are they picking China over the US, or are they using China to gain concessions from Biden? So far, the signs are not good for Washington, D.C. China is sharing missile technology with Riyadh. Aramco is building energy complexes and refineries in China. Reports say they could soon sell oil for the yuan instead of the dollar. So Riyadh is investing political capital on this relationship. The question is it too late for the US already? Can they regain their ally? Well, they can, but only if they put politics over principles. Let me give you an example from this weekend. Saudi Arabia executed 81 people in one day, 81. The legalities were dubious. But here's how the State Department reacted to it. Even the journalists were surprised by the response.
We continue to raise with Saudi Arabia the need to ensure fair trial guarantees, freedom from arbitrary and extrajudicial detention, transparency, the rule of law, and freedom of religion and belief.
So that's it? You don't have anything else to say about 81 people just being somewhere being executed?
We have been clear about our concerns about the lack of respect for fair trial guarantees.
Does this mean Joe Biden is tempering his rhetoric? If he is, then it's mission accomplished for Mohammed bin Salman. If not, he can always pivot to China. Like I said, this is an untested relationship. How much military assistance will China provide the Saudis? How much leverage will they bring over Iran? All of these questions have yet to be answered. But for now, Saudi Arabia holds the cards. So China is making new friends, but all is not well within China. This week, Chinese stocks recorded their biggest fall since 2008, biggest fall in 14 years. The scale of the losses is best described by this report. The wealthiest people of China lost $72 billion in a day. That's right, a collective loss of $72 billion. Today, the Chinese markets did bounce back. Beijing made an intervention. The top economic policy czars of Xi Jinping issued a statement. They vowed to ensure stability in their markets. The comments were welcomed by investors, but this recovery looks tepid, especially when you consider the last 12 months. Since 2021, Chinese stocks have lost 75% of their value in the US, 75%. So they are selling in the US market at a 75% discount. That's the extent of the devaluation. China's economic problems are compounding. It began with Beijing's crackdown on tech titans in China. The defaults in China's property sector made it worse. And now two new problems have spooked investors. The first one is China's latest Wuhan virus outbreak. It's simply too big to ignore now. Nearly 30 million Chinese citizens are under lockdown. 30 million, at least 13 cities have shut down. This includes the economic hub of Shenzhen. Shenzhen alone accounts for 11% of China's GDP. That's worth close to $2 trillion. Let's put those numbers in context. Shenzhen's GDP is bigger than the GDP of countries like Spain or South Korea. Shutting Shenzhen down means losses in exports. The lockdowns will have a deep impact on the Chinese economy. They threaten about half of China's economy, according to one estimate. Problem number two is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Beijing is not openly supporting Moscow after the sanctions. But even silent support has repercussions. 2 days ago, investors began dumping Chinese tech stocks. The total loss, $2.1 trillion. You heard that right, $2.1 trillion worth of losses. What was the reason behind this mass sell-off? It was a report. We told you about it. Russia had asked for China's military assistance. Russia wanted Chinese military equipment. It also asked for additional economic assistance. Just this request led to a sell-off of $2.1 trillion. That's how markets work. Reports say the investors are worried. They fear if Beijing helps Moscow, Chinese firms would be sanctioned next. And this is a legitimate concern. The US is making all of those threats. The White House says if China backs Russia militarily in Ukraine, there will be consequences.
Well, I'm not going to get into specific consequences. I think what we have conveyed and what was conveyed by our national security advisor in this meeting is that should they provide military or other assistance that, of course, violates sanctions or supports the war effort, that there will be significant consequences. But in terms of what those specifics look like, we would coordinate with our partners and allies to make that determination. Okay.
Looks like Beijing got the message. Yesterday, China's foreign minister issued a statement. He said China wants to avoid being impacted by US sanctions. That's Wang Yi for you. Beijing is also distancing itself from recent reports. It denied the claim that Russia approached China for weapons. And it labeled these claims as disinformation. So for the moment, panic in the Chinese market has been contained. But on the economic front, Xi Jinping keeps stumbling from one crisis to another. As long as that's the case, the Chinese economy will struggle to bounce back. We'll keep tracking that story for you. For the moment, we look at Gravitas global headlines.
A cameraman and a producer working for Fox News have been killed in fighting near Kyiv. 2 other Ukrainian journalists, as well as a US documentary filmmaker, have also been killed. The United Nations says over 3 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of Russia's invasion, and the number of refugees who have fled Ukraine since the Russian invasion grew by more than 90,000 in the last 24 hours. The International Energy Agency has cut its world oil demand forecast for 2022, warning that sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine could spark a global supply shock. Two British Iranians, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashuri, are flying back to Britain after being released from custody in Iran, as the government in London confirms it has paid a long-standing debt over a cancelled defense contract. South Korea reported over 400,000 new daily COVID-19 cases, the highest since the country reported its first COVID-19 case in January last year. More of these cases were said to be locally transmitted. Cameroonian separatists have attacked the village of Manga across the border in Nigeria for harboring people who fled the violence, sparking fears about a fresh threat in southeast Nigeria. A mass of hot air from the Sahara dumped across much of Spain. The National Air Quality Index qualified as extremely unfavorable in Madrid. Spain's weather service described the storm as extraordinary. At least 60 homes in a remote area of the Peruvian Andes were burned in a landslide as a hillside collapsed after heavy rainfall in the area. Local authorities said neighbors were trying to rescue others trapped by breaking the walls of several houses. Pakistan earned a thrilling draw against Australia in the second test, courtesy of a stunning innings from captain Babar Azam. Chasing a mammoth 506 in Karachi, the hosts began the day on 192 for 2. Azam led from the front and fell just 4 runs short of a maiden double century. Mohammad Rizwan also hit 100 as Pakistan ended their innings on 443 for 7.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching. See you tomorrow.
Reversal motion. First. Vehicle has cleared the tower.
LV 0009, it's on its way to space. Our next